2023. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. All of our voting full board members are here tonight, so we're going to use no alternates for our vote, although alternates can participate in the debate and the discussion. Let me remind everybody who will address the board to please make sure the microphones are turned on and speak clearly into them so the folks at home can hear you. Please also introduce yourself and identify yourself for the record. The next planning board meeting after tonight is currently scheduled for July 18th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. in the Matthew Thornton room, which is this room. That is the only meeting scheduled for July because of the 4th of July holiday. Okay, let's see. Next thing on our agenda is the consent agenda. There is one item on the consent agenda, which is an extension request for L&W Supplies site plan located at 17 Smith Road. What is the will of the board with respect to the consent agenda?
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 7-0-0 to approve the consent agenda. Nice and smooth that time. I like that. Okay. Merrimack Parcel A LLC as the applicant, and Merrimack Parcel A LLC and Slate Merrimack Acquisition LLC as the owners. This is a continued review for consideration of an amendment to a previously approved mixed-use development conditional use permit, calling for the replacement of 93,720 square feet of office space, 37,400 square feet of retail, 15,800 square feet of restaurant space, and 5,000 square feet event center as part of Phase 2, with 178 multifamily residential units, 5,000 square feet of office space, 7,400 square feet of retail space, 8,000 square feet of restaurant space, and an increase of the 7,600 square feet of restaurant space approved as part of Phase 1 to 8,000 square feet, as well as a reduction of the 120 hotel room approved as part of Phase 1 to 110 rooms. The parcels are located at 1, 2, 3, and 4 Lexington Court in the I-2 Industrial and Aquifer Conservation Districts and Wellhead Protection Area. Tax Map 3C, lots 191-2U1 and 191-2U4. It's Case Planning Board 2023-5, and it is continued from our April 4th, May 2nd, and May 16th Planning Board meetings. Tim, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As you know, this project has been continued several times. The last continuance from in May was to allow for a consultation with legal counsel, which the board has now had. The public hearing at this point was closed, and you have the option of beginning deliberations, or you may open it back up for the applicant and the public to speak. But ultimately, the staff recommendation has not changed. The staff's recommendation would be option 2 for the memo dated May 12th.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. Planning board members, do you wish to hear more from the applicant and the abutters? Or you wish to begin deliberations? What say you? I would certainly typically have approached this by saying, let's hear from the applicant with anything you'd like to add from its last presentation, and then hear from the abutters with anything they'd like to add from the last presentations.
I think we told the abutters at the last meeting that we would.
Microphone.
We do
It's
that.
on.
Okay.
Closer.
I think we did tell the abutters there'd be an opportunity
There'd be an
tonight,
opportunity,
certainly.
so I think we need to do that.
Yeah. Any other comments, questions, any other approach? Okay, applicants, come on forward. Thank you for being here. Please introduce yourself for the record and tell us anything that you'd like to know as sort of the closing message before we hear from the abutters, hear from you again, and then deliberate.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Morgan Hollis. I'm an attorney Gottesman and Hollis Professional Association, 39 East Pearl Street in Nashua. I'm here this evening representing the applicant. Also with me is Gordon Leedy. The applicant is here this evening as well. And I guess we have presented our entire presentation of the application, and we have no new evidence to offer. I guess we're a little bit, we would like to speak on the recommendation briefly, in that you all may recall exactly where you were, not the last meeting, but the meeting before, when a motion had been made, which coincidentally is not in your minutes, so you may want to consider looking at those minutes and comparing the minutes to exactly what the video shows. A motion was made, and then a second, and then it was withdrawn, and a motion was made to continue to allow the staff to make a recommendation of conditions of approval. And so we find ourselves a little bit uncomfortable, as we stated at the last meeting. We'll state again today that we made a presentation, answered all of the issues. I think the points were, does this proposed amendment fit within the criteria? And that's what we spent hours upon debating about, whether it fits in the criteria. The proposed recommendation this evening was, as stated by staff, number 2, option number 2, which says, I make a motion to deny the applicant's request for relief from the dimensional density requirements for being far in excess of the reasonable density found anywhere in Merrimack, being 37.5 times more dense than standard density, or 6.28 times denser than PUD density requirements, contrary to the vision and recommendations espoused by the town's current master plan and inconsistent with the levels of increased density that have been approved either through variance or dimensional relief in a mixed-use CUP for every recent high-density residential development. And I guess the only comment I have on that is there's been, I think we all agree that the planning board must consider if the proposal meets the criteria of the CUP. And as I said, you spent a great deal of time at length going through each one of the criteria and making comments and making observations about the modification of the application, that is the reduction in number of residential units, down from what had been authorized as the maximum under the ZBA. So what do we really disagree about? And that is whether the proposed density, residential density, is too much, and by what standard is it too much? And the minutes reflect that I said on May 2, and will say again, that the one criteria of apparent consideration, density, was in the first instance covered by the ZBA variance. And I know there's some disagreement on that, but I simply would say that this project started with the need to go and obtain a variance to allow the CUP process to begin. That is, mixed use is not permitted on this lot. So the first step is, can we get a variance to allow mixed use? That was granted in 2015 with a very specific model presented, number of units presented, square footage presented, and a variance was approved to allow mixed use in this zone. It's not otherwise allowed. In 2019, the applicant came in and requested staff that they would like to modify the original approval of the CUP, as well as the site plan, as well as what was presented at the ZBA, with additional units, some 208 residential, removing the commercial units. That is a commercial office space, and the parking garage. And staff determined that in order to do that, this proposal had to go to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And it went to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. The application before the Zoning Board of Adjustment was presented, and the presentation is said in the variance narrative, once the Zoning Board of Adjustment granted the variances, the applicant sought and obtained conditional use permits and site plan approval for a hotel, restaurant, or retail space, and an apartment complex consisting of 224 residential apartments. The site plan approval for the last phase of the project was left for a future date. Phase 1 is under construction. The applicant wishes to proceed with a mixed-use concept plan modified to include the hotel, restaurant, and multifamily building presently under construction and an additional multifamily building for 224 market rate rental apartments. However, upon presenting the concept to the Merrimack Planning and Zoning Departments, the town has determined that in order to proceed with additional residential units, the applicant must obtain a variance to permit the additional rental units. While the project is still a mixed-use project, the residential component is larger than first conceived. The zoning board heard the case, and on 2021, April 1, 2021, the letter to Mr. Monahan says, the board voted 410 to grant the variance under 2.02.4D of the zoning ordinance to permit mixed-use development conditional use permit to be sought from the planning board at a higher residential density than was originally approved by variance in 2015. The petitioner shall obtain approval for an amended CUP permit from the planning board to allow the addition of the second apartment building up to 208 additional multifamily residential units. That was the application, that was the vote. The recommendation of the staff has consistently said, this is too dense, there's too much density, and nowhere else in this town does this density exist. My comment is, and they've consistently said that the planning board decides the density, not the zoning board. My comment is, if the planning board consistently determines the density, why was it sent to the zoning board? Not once, but twice. And then again in 2021, to make sure that that variance didn't lapse, we had to go back and ask for an extension. The reason why is because the density is in fact determined by a variance. This use itself, the mixed use, is decided by a variance. It can't be here without the variance. What is your job, and I believe staff and we agree, is that the planning board considers whether under that permitted density area, does the application meet the criteria of the conditional use permit? What it is not, and what is not your job, is to determine whether the residential density is greater than anywhere else in this city. I mean, that's this town. That's a fact. We know that. We don't disagree with that. And nor did you disagree with it when the original conditional use permit, which allowed density greater than anywhere else in your town, was granted. Also, what was granted was a very intense use of commercial. Lots of square footage, big parking garage, a very intense site. So what you're really deciding is, does the residential component, which is now being asked to be an amendment to the commercial component, is that a more intense development than what was approved? And not intense in one aspect or another. Because as I've said before, your zoning ordinance nowhere defines what's mixed use. What makes it mixed use? Can it be one retail store and 600 units? Can it be 50 retail stores and 30 units? It doesn't define what it is. You have to decide, does it fit within those criteria? Does the mixed use application fit within the criteria? I think you spent a great deal of time deliberating that, as we did with you. It now comes down to, the staff says, it's too much residential, not enough non-residential to make it a proper mixed use. It's too intense because it's greater than anywhere else in this town. The question is it too intense under the CUP criteria? And we think we answered that question and presented why in a very lengthy presentation. Remember, the board approved a very intense use of offices and parking garage where the residential is now proposed. We have demonstrated through testimony and reports that the proposed residential is in fact less intense of a use than what was already approved. I would also add, and I'd be remiss if I didn't, that you received a report from the staff indicating that it's not only the most intense in this town, but it's the most intense elsewhere in the larger cities of the state. And that's an incorrect statement, in that I am familiar with 3 projects that I have some peripheral involvement in the last several years, one on Front Street in Nashua, one on Temple Street in Nashua, one on High Street, where the zoning ordinance is an overlay zoning ordinance, much like the conditional use permit, and the planning board decides the density. In those 3, 44 units per acre, 44 units per acre, 243 units per acre. Again, I'm only pointing this out in that I don't want you to have a one-sided view that you are about to consider granting the greatest density in the state of New Hampshire. That is not the case here. But most importantly, it really doesn't matter, because that's not the criteria, whether it's the most dense residential development in the state or in your town or anything else. It's, again, back to, did it fit the criteria? Did we cover all 9 bases of the criteria? I think we can disagree. We can agree to disagree on the point of made by the staff of it's simply too much, and therefore you should reject it. What I think we do agree on is you have to give consideration, does this proposed density and this proposed use meet the criteria of CUP? I think we went through each of those. Even if I'm wrong and staff is right, which again begs the question why staff sent us to the zoning board when we could have come here and not necessarily gone to the zoning board to increase the residential use. But let's suppose the staff is right and I'm absolutely wrong. Again, what does 4E, 202.4E, section 202.4E of your ordinance actually say? And I'm just going to read it. You're very familiar with it. This is what you're deciding. The planning board, first, in general, the mixed-use development shall be required to comply with the provisions of section 302, provided, however, that proposed planned unit development uses and lots shall be controlled by the requirements of section 15. That's the gist of their argument, of staff's argument, that, hey, you're allowed under the CUP to have residential, but it has to follow the PUD. And if you follow the PUD, you fall under 15, and under 15, the density is way off. But E says the planning board may, in its sole discretion, require more or less stringent dimensional requirements than those referenced above to facilitate the integration and connections between mixed-use areas being developed and to provide reasonable buffering and separation between proposed residential, commercial, and industrial uses. So those numbers aren't fixed under section 15. It's within your range. We've said it. Staff has said it. It's up to you to decide. But there are specific criteria you have to meet. You can't just say it is simply too dense for this town. You have to decide it doesn't meet the criteria, one point of the criteria, and you have to say that you've decided that it's unnecessary to allow this, and these are the good reasons why. We urge you to be careful. We urge you to go back to what your deliberations were, which was meaningful deliberations, and I would urge you to ignore what's become a back and forth here a bit between the staff advocating in one direction and us advocating another. Just stick with your job, stick in your lane, know what your job is, which is to evaluate the criteria and make a very specific decision on the criteria. I don't think this case has to turn, this matter has to turn in any way on whether density is dimensional or not dimensional. But as I said, if I'm wrong and it does turn on that, fine. Look to what your ordinance says. Dimensional, it's up to you. You can make it go up or down. It's got to fit within the conditional use parameters. I think you had a full and fair debate. We're here to answer any questions you might have on those criteria. But as I say, I would be remiss if I didn't point out those issues. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Attorney Hollis. Anything else that you'd like to add for the discussion?
I don't really have much to add. I guess I would, just from a planning perspective, because I am a planner, I look at the intensity of use as measured not by number of units per acre, because that's a symptom, not a cause, if you will. So if you look at the traffic numbers, you look at the open space that is in the plan, in the current plan, the traffic numbers are less than the approved plan would generate. The open space is more than the approved plan showed. The buffers are the same. The uses are a little bit different. So hours of operation, we can talk about whether that's a positive or a negative effect. But by and large, I would say that the plan that we are proposing is a less intense use than the plan that was approved. So therefore, I mean, I think you have to consider that.
Thank you. Okay, let's open up the floor for abutters and interested citizens who wish to weigh in. Who wants to go first?
Not at this point, but before we conclude, I'd like to add some comments as well.
Certainly. Tim, thank you.
Good evening.
Mr.
My
Mills.
name is Michael Mills. I live at 7 Arbor Street in Merrimack. That was an interesting presentation. I had an opportunity to review the minutes from the last meeting, and I was surprised that my comments took up more space in the minutes than the presentation by the developer. I looked in the minutes to find out what was actually being proposed on this project, the number of floors that were going to be facing our neighborhood. Nowhere in those minutes does it state the number of floors of the building that's going to be proposed. The last time I was up here before you, I brought that to the attention of the board. I said when the developers' representatives discussed the height of the building, it's going to be floors high. It never even made the minutes. Does anyone know how high the building is going to be? How many floors? Can I ask a question to the board and do I get an answer? Does anyone know how high this building is going to be?
Mr. Mills, it's not an opportunity to ask questions of the board, but you can provide testimony.
Okay. Where would I find that information if it's not in the minutes of the meeting? It's not in the minutes.
Again, this is an opportunity for you to provide testimony, sir.
Okay, let me provide testimony. The minutes need to provide the information that is necessary for the abutters and the neighborhood to properly prepare for this meeting. One of the facts that we need to know is how high is this building? Is it 2 stories, 3 stories, 4 stories, 5 stories? How high is it? What are we going to be facing?
Tim?
If I can clarify, because this is not a site plan, there is no actual design being approved for the building at this time. It's purely the conditional use permit that allows them to move forward to the site plan process.
Thank you. It's amazing that a resident of this town has to go through this every other week. We're back to the facts that we presented before, and I'm going to take up the board's time unless the board shuts me off. Let me say it was interesting that the attorney representing the developer mentioned his contributions in getting a project on Temple Street in Nashua, New Hampshire approved. Let me just say that that development in Nashua that he was a part of, that he was representing, was facing the same situation that we're facing here today. And I don't know if you're familiar, and I'll make it really short, but that project was faced with an asphalt plant being built in its backyard. And that developer stood up and said, that's going to destroy my neighborhood. That's going to destroy my building. That's going to destroy the livelihood of the people living in my property. And it was unanimously defeated by the planning board because an asphalt plant doesn't belong in Nashua in a residential district, and a multi-story 108, I don't even know how many units are going to be in there now, 180 units in this new building does not belong 240 feet away from the door of the abutters to the side of the building, 240 feet. That's what it is, measured on the plan. I'm glad that the attorney brought that up, but same problem we have. Again, I'll say the very same problem we have. The owner of that property stood up and said, that's going to destroy our development. This is going to destroy our neighborhood. And this board has the right to stand up and say, great presentation. But one of the conditions that have to be met is that this has to not have an effect on adjacent residential property. And it has a major effect. I believe that probably everybody's gone by the Slate building. I hope you've all noticed the new lighting that's gone up at the tops of the building. Very, very pretty. We've presented pictures to this planning board on numerous occasions that show already the lighting. It's not dead lighting, it's bright lighting. And you're being asked to approve or to move ahead with something that doesn't even address the issues of lighting on the other properties. It doesn't address the noise that 180 units are going to make on buildings, on housing that's adjacent to that. It doesn't address any of the noise requirements. It's one of the conditions that cannot have an adverse effect on adjacent property. This has a very serious effect on adjacent property. It destroys adjacent property. People have owned those properties for 40 and 50, 60, I'm sorry, not 60 years, but 40 and 50 years they've lived out there. We know there's going to be changes in the neighborhood. We know that. But you don't build an apartment building with that many units that's going to destroy, literally destroy people's homes. It's going to destroy people's homes. 240 feet away from the back door, not from the property line, not from the, anything else, from the end of the side of the building to the back door of some of those houses is 240 feet. We don't even know what's being proposed for number of stories. We know nothing about it. I'll ask another question here, and I know I won't get an answer, but let me ask. Was the meeting with the attorney that was held with the planning board members, I understand that was already held. Are there minutes to that? Is there any public information so that we can look to see what was discussed at that meeting and what the outcome of that meeting was? I have to assume that there should be, and I'll tell you why.
Mr. Mills might shorten this up for you. No, there isn't, and the law doesn't require it. When the board meets with its attorney, it's called a non-meeting, and by law, it has no minutes or other record for it.
How convenient. Let me say what I was going to say, please. This is our town attorney, and our planning board. That should be public. There's no need. There's no need to make a secret of what was discussed between our town attorney and our town planning board. That should be public information for everyone to look at and understand.
Mr. Milnes, I won't cut you off, and I don't want to necessarily reshape your discussion, but your disagreements with the state of New Hampshire as to that particular point, I'd like you to focus on the things that are within our purview, so that all of this is
within our purview, sir. I already discussed the lighting behind the building. We have no idea what the lighting is behind the building. It has, before I can move on, I understand that it has to show that it has no adverse effect on adjacent property. This has very serious effect on adjacent property. I don't understand how this board can excuse itself. That's probably the wrong word. My wife was here. She'd give me the right word to use. I don't understand how this board can at one meeting say, okay, we want the roundabout to be put into this project before we start construction and lots of cars are driving in. I don't understand how the developer can come before this board and ask the board to give him permission to get occupancy permits before the entire building is done or before the roundabout is done. Now, using logic through this process, Phase 1A is to build the hotel. When the hotel is being built, the roundabout has to go in. I have yet to hear any discussion at all about when the hotel is being built. I've sat here after meeting saying, no, it's not under construction. The hotel is not under construction. Yeah, they ran some sewer pipes over there. Maybe they ran a water pipe, but there's no construction taking place. We sat here at this meeting and been told by the developer that, yeah, I had someone who was interested in a hotel, but it fell through. Can someone explain to me when the roundabout is going to go in if the hotel is never built? Here we are talking about building another 180 units. There's going to be more cars going into that project than there are going into the shopping center in the morning and in the afternoon. And no one's addressing that. I sit here at every meeting and I say, how come that was never brought up? Another question that I won't get an answer to, but is it this board's position to ignore the concerns of our neighborhood? Is it this board's position to, hey, I think it's number 9, I might be wrong on the number, but I know that's a condition in order to approve things, but hey, so it infringes on the neighborhood. They're not going to infringe on that. Multi-story building, what problem is that? Maybe this isn't the point to talk about landscaping, but I'll talk about landscaping as far as it relates to Slate Management and the Slate building. And I can mention that because Slate is listed as one of the owners of this property that we're discussing this evening. I brought up at several meetings that Slate has never signed the application for this new building. And if they're an owner, how can you have an owner not sign the application to build another building on property? I can't sign as the owner of anyone else's house here because I don't own it. And you're not going to hear it unless I put my name down as being the owner of the property. This meeting should not be held. It was not properly filed. The owner of the property has not properly signed the application for this hearing. His name appears, he appears as the owner of the property, but he doesn't sign as the owner of the property. I started mentioning the landscaping. Does this board have any control over anything that takes place? Developers come in here and they show a nice plan with landscaping everywhere. They show the buffer between their building and the Continental Boulevard. This board approves it, and then the developer comes in, the builder comes in, and takes all the trees down between their building and Continental Boulevard. Nobody says anything. What the heck? What's the problem? What are you upset about? The plan shows landscaping around the property. They're dead. Take a look at it. Half the trees out there are dead. And if that qualifies for the landscaping, I have no idea at all what landscaping is. Move that to this new building. What's going to happen behind this building that's 240 feet away from abutters? And are there going to be lights there? Is there, and this has to be discussed because one of the conditions that has no adverse effect on residential neighborhoods. Are there lights? Are there people? Are there trash cans back there? Are they going to be picking up trash? People going to be walking back there? It's never been discussed at any meeting that we attended. Hasn't even been mentioned. Does anybody know what the back of the building is going to look like? Are there going to be lights? Is there going to be noise? Is there going to be parking? Is that where the trash cans are going? Does anybody know? It seems to me, as well as several other people that I've talked to that ask me to attend these hearings, that there is so little logic between what was proposed for the conditional use permit and where we are today. Let's go in. It's probably time for me to read what I was going to say here. I'm a retired real estate developer. I've developed property here in Merrimack, Nashua, Maine, different states. I know I have some experience. I'm not here with no experience. I wish I knew when I presented plans in Merrimack what I know today. I really wish I did. Nelson, you're probably familiar with that. Simply put, tell the planning board what they want to hear. Oh, we're going to build a hotel with 120 rooms. We're going to have commercial space like you can't believe. This is our plan over here. Look how pretty this all is. Okay, this is what it's going to look like. Okay. Tell the planning board what they want to hear. Get my approval. Easy to get. Get my approval. Keep changing what I want to do. Well, 120 units, now it's going to be 130 units, but we're going to make this a little bit bigger and really confuse everybody. Like I was confused listening to the attorney's presentation just a short while ago. And once I get the approval, do what the heck I want to do. I have the approval for conditional use permit. I don't know if I'm ever going to build commercial space. I keep changing the size. I keep making it smaller and smaller and smaller. That was the plan of the planning board. Build the commercial space first before the apartments went in. I was at that meeting. That's gone. What's before the planning board now is like, well, so we're going to have the greatest number of apartments anywhere in this, except for 3 exceptions, excuse me, in the state of New Hampshire than anywhere else. And that's fine. That's not a problem. Because a planning board cannot say no. You can. Every one of you can say, no, this is not what the conditional use permit was approved for. It was for so many square feet of commercial, so many square feet of retail, so many apartments. You've got the number of apartments already, so stop talking about it. Please listen to us. Please, you have the authority to make this project what it was presented to be, not what it is years after the fact, because, hey, once I get my approval from the planning board, I can do what the heck ever I want to do. And that's where we are right now. I hope that this planning board, and I believe that you do, I hope that you listen to us. You see how this is not what was approved several years ago, and certainly not what the town wants. It's not what the town needs, and it's going to cause problems for those living in the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Are there others who'd like to speak? Going once, twice? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. I'm sorry, what? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Tim, you're not public though. For the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things I just wanted to clarify and summarize based on some of the information we talked about this afternoon. First and foremost, there was a piece of the history of the project that Attorney Hollis skipped. The original approval for this CUP was 192 residential units. The first amendment that came before the planning board was to increase that 192 units to 224. That project was granted through the process outlined in the ordinance that allowed the planning board to grant the additional density as a flexibility to that dimensional requirement. And it did not require going back to the zoning board of adjustment because in the opinion of staff at that time, it was reasonably consistent with the variance that the zoning board had granted, allowing for the conditional use permit for mixed use on this project. The reason this went back to the zoning board for the most recent variance for the additional residential density is because it was not within the same realm of that original variance approval. It was the determination of staff that in order for that project to be eligible to come back to the planning board, because mixed-use developments are not allowed in this location, that it needed additional relief from the zoning board. The zoning board granted that relief, allowing them to move forward to the planning board, leaving that flexibility in staff's opinion to grant relief as you see fit under the dimensional relief section of the mixed-use project. Outside of that, I agree mostly with what Morgan said at the end. You do have the ability under that section of the ordinance to grant more or less dimensional flexibility for this particular project. Where I disagree slightly with Attorney Hollis is that that section is independent of the criteria of the conditional use permit that are listed further in the ordinance. The section states that it is in your sole purview to grant or deny additional relief to dimensional requirements. My recommendation to the board is simply this, that you consider the significance of the change being proposed to the project, that you consider the character of other multifamily residential development that has taken place over the recent years in Merrimack, and base your decision on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Board members, let me open up the floor to you to begin the deliberation. Where would you like to begin, or do you want me to sort of do anything in particular to guide the conversation, or suggestions? Okay.
Go for it.
So when we were here, I think it was our May meeting, we went through the conditional use criteria. The memo that we were following from that meeting is part of the package. It's the probably about 20 pages in. It's the April 27, 2023 memo that Tim drafted. And beginning on the 6th page of that, he walks us through the 11 criteria. We did that once, and that was the meeting that brought us to a point where we were about to make a motion, and then with some good advice from Robert, it was sort of like, pause, we don't have any conditions of approval to consider. And so we did that. Does it make sense to sort of refresh that discussion and go through those criteria, or to talk about density? What's the will of the board on that? No opinions. Okay, so
I think I've heard enough of it.
okay. Does anyone have any sort of general comments about the project in itself? Neil.
Yeah, no, I was just I've said it before at other meetings. The original plan that they presented was beautiful, and I think Mr. Mills said it. Yeah, they're giving us what we want to hear, and the original plan was beautiful and it looked great, and then it changed dramatically. There was already one variance to increase density, and now they're asking for now this, and the numbers that you're showing us as far as the increase in density exceeds what I'm comfortable with. It exceeds not only that, just the whole plan is not anything as to what I would have agreed on in the first place. And I still feel that way. I don't think it's something that's right for Merrimack. I don't like the amount of apartments. I don't like that they took away all the other stuff. You say something about like I don't like driving by a place and seeing like parking lots go up, and I don't see any green space. I don't really see the beautiful picture that they painted for us. And with that, I would vote to deny the approval of the amendment.
Other folks have comments?
That's my
Barbara?
opinion. So
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion,
Okay.
if you're ready for that.
Once the motion is made and seconded, there certainly is an opportunity for continued discussion. So
Okay. So, Mr. Chair, I move to deny the applicant's request for relief from the dimensional/density requirements of section 2.024 D4E, sorry, new glasses, for being far in excess of reasonable density found anywhere else in Merrimack, being 37.5 times more dense than standard density or 6.28 times denser than PUD density requirements, contrary to the vision and recommendations espoused by the town's current master plan, and inconsistent with the levels of increased density that have been approved either through variance or dimensional relief in a mixed-use CUP for every recent high-density residential development in the town of Merrimack.
is there a second for Councilor Healy's motion? Second by Paul. Discussion. I'll offer my own discussion. I don't support the motion. I think that when we talk about density, the real impact on the site or the real function of the site is a measure of sort of our traditional planning board characteristics of traffic and parking and open space and lighting and those kinds of things that we'll get to on site plan review. This notion of density in terms of counting apartment buildings per acre or residential units per acre is kind of a not very functional planning statistic. We don't count offices per acre. And if the applicant came and said, I want to build 20,000 offices here, we'd probably cheer them and say, that's fantastic. But it would be 100 times more impactful on the site and to the neighbors if they proposed that. And I think the applicant said tonight, and correctly, what the last thing that we proposed is more traffic and activity and hustle and bustle on the site with 93,000 square feet of office and that sort of thing that was a part of it. And so I think that our focus ought to be on the function of the site, which are the criteria for granting a conditional use permit that we discussed. And I would oppose this motion because I'd like to see us make a decision based on those criteria rather than on sort of a abstract concept of something called density. I also think that the density, an approach on density has some legal interpretations involved in it that are open for debate, and I'm not sure we're landing on the right side with the motion that we're having. So, Barbara?
So I would also like to further state that one of the criteria is that there is no negative impact on neighbors and the abutters. And this most definitely, as we have seen through the various lengthy demonstrations and presentations, that there really isn't a whole lot of buffering here. There's a slight buffering spot. There's a little access road out there that's used for emergency vehicles for the outlets. And other than that, as we've been told, it's very close to 240 feet door to door with the neighbors. So yeah, it's from that perspective, yeah, you got 402 total units if we approve this new 178. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a negative impact on the area, on the neighbors, on the abutters. I just, in good conscience, cannot approve something that has 40.84 units per acre. And since most of us, a lot of us, have 1 acre of land that our house is built on, that gives you a comparison of size. So think of your yard with your house, and now put a building on there that has 40.84 units. That's the density we're talking about. I know you don't like the word density, but the fact of the matter is that's a lot of people in 1 acre of land. So, thank you.
I don't necessarily want to offer some argument to try and change your view of density, but I want, which of the criteria you're thinking of, which is the one that you talked about with impacts? Because there's some that are close, like number 10, I think, but it has specifics in it. So the number 10 says the proposed development will not result in unreasonable impacts to adjoining properties or uses by way of light, noise, pollution, visual blight, odor, vibration, or other nuisance.
All of it.
And as the planning board discussed last time when we had this discussion, and I think even the staff supports the fact that the applicant doesn't seem to violate that one. But that's the one, the number 11, number 10
Yes.
that you're relying on? Okay. 10. Lynn?
I'm more in agreement with you, Bob. I look at, first of all, the need for housing in the state. No, we shouldn't provide it all for the state, but I think we have a piece of property that is located in an ideal spot to put large quantities of housing. I think you're on Industrial and Continental. Yes, it abuts up residential area, but that's something that I believe can be addressed in the site plan review. And a lot of the comments that I'm hearing are related to site plan review, not related to this particular density issue. Lighting, landscaping, the placement of the buildings, the buffering, that's all site plan review. If and when we approve this tonight, or not, if we go to site plan review, that will be addressed significantly on the site plan review, because no, it should not be detrimental to the neighboring homes that are already there. But I believe this location is appropriate because of the proximity to some large corporations, proximity to the highway. You're not going through residential areas and up and down DW Highway that's highly congested. You're right there. So I believe this particular location is appropriate for this particular proposal. Yes, it's different from what it was. The market is different from what it was. As you start going through the process, you find things that need to be changed. And you come back, I don't believe it's a bait and switch, and I know we've been accused of that a number of times. I believe it's responding to market and to any number of other solutions that should be presented. So I believe we should allow this.
Any other comments? Nelson?
Yeah. I'll just say, I don't get to vote on this because we've got a full board tonight, so I won't be voting on it. But I really have to sort of agree with Bob and Lynn in that I think that it's different than what we saw in the beginning, and that's too bad. And I was in favor of it from the beginning, but at this point, it's gotten bigger than I ever thought it would get, and I think it's got more impact than I ever thought it would have. And I would probably vote against this motion if I were voting, but I'm not voting, so just say that. Yeah.
Any other comments on things? Okay, if we're no further comments, then the motion is to deny the proposed amendment to a conditional use permit?
It's to deny the dimensional relief. That's the motion is on the table. It's not for the amendment, it's for the dimensional relief portion.
Okay, I think it sort of functionally does the same thing.
It doesn't, because if you deny the dimensional relief, then you then have no basis to approve the conditional use permit. That's why the motion recommendation is in two steps. If you're not going to grant the dimensional relief, you need to have a specific motion. If you're going to approve the dimensional relief, you can incorporate that into your motion to approve the overall project.
Functionally, we'll deny the application if you vote no, or if you vote for the motion. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with the necessity of two steps, but I know that's how you wrote out the option, and that's fine to vote on it that way. It is to deny the dimensional relief, which will functionally eliminate the second potential vote on the approval of the CUP. And so if you vote yes, then you do not want the project to be changed. And if you vote no, then you want to have other discussion and other motions. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. 3. All opposed, say aye. 1, 2, 3. I'm missing somebody because there's 7 of us.
Jamie?
Gotcha.
Sorry, you're hiding over there, huh? Yeah. Okay. So 3 to 4, the motion to deny the dimensional relief fails. Is there any alternative motion the board would consider?
Having no suggested wording,
Just, you, at the board's request in the previous memo, there is a option 3, that if you determine that you want to move forward, there is an option.
yeah, I couldn't find it, Tim. Hang on a
Can you
minute.
direct me to it in the memo, Tim? Is that
It's option 3.
in the
On
June 12th
page-
memo?
Yes, it's in the June 12th memo. No, the May 12th memo, excuse me,
Oh,
May
all right.
12th memo.
which is right after the top memo and the minutes from the last meeting.
Okay, option 3. This.
I'll read it into the records for people to listen. Should the board opt to disagree with the staff recommendation to move forward with a motion to conditionally approve the requested CUP amendment, the board is reminded to make applicable findings as to why the board is granting the approval, and staff offers the following regarding conditions of approval. We note that these are typical conditions germane to all mixed-use CUPs. Specific conditions related to this project, with limited specific conditions related to this project, given our recommendations to deny the application in option 2. In this, there are 7 precedent conditions that the applicant revised the master site development plan and narrative application to include all necessary amendments as approved by the planning board, replacing any plans and narrative portions that were changed by the amendment. 2, that the applicant address forthcoming comments from municipal departments, boards, committees as determined applicable in amended CUP by the Community Development Department. 3, that the applicant shall include as part of the final submission of the conditional use permit package a new and updated page which includes signature block for planning board final endorsement of the amended CUP and full-size copy of the master site development plan for board signature. 4, the applicant obtain written verification from the Merrimack Village District and the Town Wastewater Division indicating the proposed CUP will provide adequate and appropriate public infrastructure to ensure the proper operation of the proposed mixed use as required by the ordinance. 5, if the board determines necessary to provide for review by the town's legal counsel at the applicant's expense, a development agreement or other similar instruments specifying phasing, timing, sequence of improvements contained within the development, performance guarantees relating thereto, and any other such development-related information the board determines necessary to ensure the successful completion. 6, that the applicant address the following relative to the fiscal impact analysis. The analysis currently only estimates school-age children using 2 recent projects. The town has consistently required school-age children multiplier to be from New Hampshire Housing Authority's statewide analysis of 0.17 school-age children per multifamily units, as was used with the most current CUP. The planning board approved multipliers for the currently approved CUP should be utilized using the NHFA's multiplier of 0.17 for the 2-bedroom units, 0 for the studio units, and 0.046 for 1-bedroom units. And the applicant shall update the report should be updated to address the increased estimate and fiscal impacts. 7, that all future phases of development regardless of sequencing shall be required to provide an updated fiscal impact analysis to ensure each phase of the project remains fiscally positive to the town. Town reserves the right to require peer review at the applicant's expense if necessary for the fiscal impact analyses as determined by the Community Development Department. And then there are 8 general and subsequent conditions, which are basically boilerplate conditions that are on all mixed-use CUPs.
Yeah, I've got that in the memo. I don't know if we need to read those in there. Number 5 suggested that if the planning board wanted a particular thing, what was that one again?
Development agreement, which we've done in cases for both Edgebrook and for Flatley.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to make sure that if the board is so inclined that.
I'd need some guidance as to what you want to see in it.
Yeah. Okay. So, when do you?
I'll try this. I move that we approve these options and that the following precedent conditions to be fulfilled within 12 months and prior to final approval.
Okay, so
Based
that's,
on the,
First of all, you need to do findings per the new state law as to,
that's why I was hoping for
I'm not
wording.
providing you findings because I'm not recommending approval. So the board will need to come up with findings on why you're granting the conditional approval. I'm providing you the conditions, but the findings would be the board's discussion.
So offering some discussion on that, if I was framing findings, I would say two things. One, I think the applicant, it's reasonable to provide the applicant the relief on the density pursuant to the board's authority to do so for the reasons that I mentioned before. And I think the other finding is that the applicant meets the 11 criteria for granting a conditional use permit. I don't know if it requires any more detailed findings than that, Tim.
That's fine. That's what the board wants. I just need something to satisfy that statutory.
I will make a motion that we approve this based on the findings that were just enumerated, and the precedent conditions listed on staff's memo,
Dated 5/16.
dated
option three.
5/16.
Is there a second for Lynn's motion?
I'll second.
Brian seconds the motion. I don't have anything to add to the discussion that we've already had, so unless somebody
The
else.
question I have is if you're going to do a development agreement, what needs to be in it?
I think that I want to have a development agreement. I don't know if we need to do that in a motion immediately after this one, talk about it, or just give you the general sense of things, or add that to this
Essentially, what we'd need is, generally speaking, the development agreements, the primary purpose of those development agreements is specifying phasing. A sequence of phasing, what order the board wants to see things happen, and the rest of it is I can work with Morgan to put together because I have a good boilerplate template that I've used for the other projects. But really, it's how you want to see the project phased would be the main part I need input on.
Does that need to be done before this motion's voted on or after
It's
this motion?
because it's part of the motion, yes.
Okay, so I think phasing is an important discussion. I think the roundabouts phasing as part of 1A in the hotel has become hard to understand, or when the hotel is going to go forward. I have been out to the site a few times, even while the buildings are occupied. I haven't had any difficulty turning into the apartment area or turning into the outlet mall. But what's the will of the board with respect to at what point the roundabout gets built? And then as to the rest of it, there's a hotel, there's a restaurant, there's some other commercial, and then there's
Isn't the
apartments.
hotel already part of 1A?
The hotel is currently part of phase. Let me specify. There's two phases. There's phase one, which includes the current residential building, which was recently completed, the 120-room hotel, and the restaurant.
Okay.
Those have sub-phases. The roundabout is currently required by condition of the site plan before either of the next non-residential portions of phase one take place, that the roundabout must be constructed before occupancy. Phase two, in the current scenario, roundabout would have already been constructed as part of phase one, assuming phase one takes place before phase two. Ultimately, the order of what things happen is up to you, but I think ultimately you need to have that roundabout in before the next portion happens.
Based on what's already approved, I believe the roundabout is to be built next, followed by, and this is what I would propose if you need it proposed, but I believe it's to be built next, and the hotel, etc., would be following the roundabout.
The only way I would clarify that is that the roundabout would need to be completed prior to occupancy of any portion of the next parts of the phases.
Then we will phrase it that way. And the additional residential units would occur in phase two after the commercial and the roundabout have been completed.
Yeah, I guess that's the way I was thinking about it is 1A is next, and it has to be fully completed before beginning phase two.
Does that include the restaurant as well, or is that just the hotel?
Includes the restaurant.
I think it's fine with me.
And then other phases at the discretion of, or do you have a particular thing with the, because we're going to end up with 5,000 square feet of office space, 7,400 square feet of retail, 8,000 square feet of restaurant.
And those are all not accounted for in
Those
phase
are
one
the,
or 1A?
those would be part of the new phase 2, including the additional residential.
Okay.
I'm fine with that.
I think that the construction of those things, those commercial items, have to be concurrent with the construction of the residential,
Okay.
and not after it. I don't want phase 2 to become sort of a multi-step thing where those things, the residential gets built and those other things linger.
Okay, so my understanding, and I want to read this back to the board to make sure I have it, is that in the development agreement, the phasing would be construction of the roundabout prior to occupancy of any other portions of phase 1A, including the revised now 110 room hotel and the 8,000 square foot restaurant. The 8,000 square foot restaurant. Phase 2 would be the construction of the hotel and the restaurant. And then beyond that, the second phase would be concurrent construction of both the new residential development and the associated non-residential development.
Yeah, the remaining commercial. Is that what everybody wants? I mean, it's not just
That's okay by
what I
me.
think. Lynn made the motion. She says it's okay. Brian, you seconded the motion. You believe that's okay?
Yep.
Okay. Discussion. So the motion before the board is to make the right findings to grant conditional final approval, subject to the conditions in the memo, plus the development agreement that was discussed here. Were there any other conditions that we wanted to add into an approval? Okay. Then all in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? That's 4-3 to grant the conditional final approval, or of the conditional use permit. Obviously, we've got site plan that will result. Tim, is there any other business that we need to do with respect to this particular agenda item?
Not with respect to this agenda item, though.
Thank you, sir. Okay, turning back to our agenda, Planning and Zoning Administrator's report and discussion and possible action regarding other items of concern. Tim, have you got a report for us?
I do not.
I have other items of concern. Fair warning to the board, our good Paul McLaughlin will be stepping off the boards shortly, although he technically isn't replaced until he's replaced.
Maybe.
But he probably isn't going to come to meetings anyway. And so, first of all, Paul, thank you very much for your years of service. It's really appreciated. You've been a great board member and a very steady and capable vice chair.
And I think it's wonderful that he's there to step in when you can't be here because he is very capable, which is why I'm not going to approve him leaving.
I'm not sure we get to vote on the approval of him leaving.
I do.
But certainly thank you for your service, sir. And for other planning board meetings, fair warning, at our next meeting, we will be looking to appoint a new vice chair. And so
Neil.
if you're not ready to do it or willing to do it, then you're going to have to sit while we have the floor for nominations open until somebody says so. So
One other
I think
planning board
Lawson, you
departure.
what's that? Yeah, I think Brian is also taken up residence on the ZBA. And thank you as well for your service. You've
Which
been
is
great
much
to the
appreciated.
board.
I'm glad you just didn't disappear. I'm
Yeah.
really happy to have you move over to ZBA.
We'll see what we can do.
And I think there may be other candidates that are interested in planning board seats, but we'll certainly have some vacancies.
I would make a recommendation for those of you who are alternates, and I'll pass this along to Maureen as well. If you're a current alternate interested in filling one of the regular member spots, please let Becky Thompson know in the general government office.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach for people that are alternates because that's part of the benefit of being an alternate is you got your feet under you. You got a few meetings and things are ready. So, Aline was talking to you. Nelson, you know you're always invited and welcome.
Pauline.
I was trying to ease out.
I have a feeling that Maureen might be interested, so.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that she may be. Okay. I don't think I have any other discussion items or possible items of concern. I guess the one thing that I would say, just as a compliment to all the board members, having had a recent tour of 3 or 4 other planning boards around the state for clients, Man, are we doing well? We have an organized and reasonable approach to this. We ask thoughtful questions, and I think that we vote based on what our regulations provide before us. And even when there's a vote tonight, like it's split between us, everybody had a reasoned position that could easily be defended. And
was respectful.
man, is there some chaos around the state.
Along those lines, and following up on some comments that were made at the end of, I don't know if it was the last meeting or the meeting before, regarding the recommendations in the staff memo. I know there was a comment about potentially having multiple recommendations for approval and denial in each memo, and the opinion that there should be a neutrality to the recommendations. I've had a chance to discuss both of those items with the town manager, and his position to me was that not to change the way the staff is currently doing that, providing a opinionated staff memo with a recommendation based on our professional recommendations, and that multiple approval and denial options are not necessary unless it's something that the circumstances warrant.
Board members, certainly wasn't aware of the input from the town manager. I still think that if it's a desire of the board to have at least the framing of a memo or the wording of a motion in each direction, we can get that. And, it doesn't mean that it has to be framed in terms of a recommendation, but I think the appropriate language to use for an alternative motion is appropriate. And
I certainly appreciate that if you can do it. I know.
I think it comes up very seldom, but I think maybe
It's
with one of those
important.
ones where we think it may come up. It may be one that we can ask for in the appropriate times when we think that there's a.
Doesn't happen very often.
When circumstances warrant, I think we absolutely would have the option of doing that. But on a regular, every memo basis, frankly, it's not going to happen.
I think that in most cases, the motion that's offered is easy to reverse. And if it's, the staff recommends that you vote to deny, you sort of reverse that and say that we vote to approve.
Yeah, I agree.
This particular tonight's case had, much more complicated wording in the motions. Anyway, any other discussion or items of concern? Okay.
So I brought this up a couple of times, but can the planning board officially ask the town to make a definition of density? Or not, or like mixed use, excuse me.
The planning board has the ability to recommend zoning ordinance changes to the town council at any time.
Right.
Just if it's something, I think the hesitation I have at making piecemeal changes to the ordinance is that we end up with the ordinance that we have now, which is a lot of amendments piecemeal together. We are within shouting distance of embarking on our next master plan effort. And I think that the more comprehensive changes to the ordinance probably should take place following the master plan process, because we'll have the vision and recommendations for that plan to move forward with.
Okay.
But ultimately, yes, the planning board can at any time make recommendations to the council for the zoning ordinance to be changed.
I like your suggestion.
And-
I do too, and I also sort of take note that I don't know. I think it was either Edgebrook is actually a smaller than normal site for a CUP, but 50 acres is the standard for our CUPs, and there just aren't any more 50-acre sites in town. So it's a question that I think in our master plan we'll start talking about mixed use on a smaller scale, and then that can be part of a definition.
Yeah.
But as to an Edgebrook, a Gilbert, or a outlet mall, there just aren't any more of those. Tim, am I overlooking a 50-acre parcel somewhere that?
Right now, again, the way the ordinance is written, you have to be on DW and over 50 acres and 500. It's 500 feet of frontage. So no, there aren't any left.
Yeah. And so we don't have urgent need for the definition.
Let me rephrase that. Accepting for the fact that parcels can be consolidated to make that happen.
Yep.
And
redeveloped.
variances can be granted as well. Yep. Okay. Let's go to the approval of the minutes of June 6th, 2023.
I move we approve as printed.
I'll second.
Is there a second? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstaining? 2 abstentions, 502 to approve those minutes. Tim had reminded me when we switched to minutes, I don't know that it will come up, but Morgan's comment about the April or the May minutes not reflecting sort of all the full discussion. Can you take a look into that and see if there ought to be any amendments or updates to those minutes? And at this point, since those minutes are approved, I would guess it would be a supplementary minute or set of minutes if we had to add things that we thought were on the recording. Or perhaps it's enough to just say the recording is kept too, and people can listen to that if they want to. What do you think? Does anybody? I don't know. Barbara?
No, I agree, because that whole conversation, I mean, that was part of the presentation, that they had lowered the building to 3 stories. And so,
In theory, because there's no construction involved.
yeah,
with the same thing.
exactly. But you know what I mean? That's what was presented to us. So there may be some missing elements there.
And it may be lowered even more.
Yep, you never
Yeah,
know.
ultimately, I think the statutory requirements for minutes are to capture the motions that were successful, which were all captured in the minutes. So yes, we probably, just the fact that we're discussing it here tonight, it's going to show up. I will make sure they show up in the minutes for tonight's meeting. So we
That's
will
why,
have
there you go. I
that's
think
why
that
I
does
said
the
that.
trick. Okay, I generally I agree with the statutory requirements for minutes are super slim.
That's why we do results the day after the meeting that literally are the bare minimum. Who was there, who presented, who talked, the motions and the votes. That basically satisfies our requirement to have minutes done within the required statutory time frame, and then we have the time to prepare the full minutes.
Anyway, okay. Our recordings are kept permanently, or are they at some point?
Right
discovered?
now, our only recordings are the YouTube videos.
Okay. And so they're kept on YouTube for as long as YouTube.
And as
continues
long
to-
as Merrimack TV keeps the appropriate DVDs or whatever copies they have electronically.
Okay, and those are not regarded as any official record of a meeting.
Correct.
They're available as long as they're available. I don't necessarily have a particular plan in mind, but it seems like there ought to be some thought behind keeping or not keeping recordings.
We have we have language in our rules of procedure that amended the way we were handling the recordings.
What does it say?
Want to give me a moment? I'll look it up.
Sorry for making a short meeting a little bit longer, folks, but still way shorter than I thought.
You are still keeping hard copies of the approved minutes, right?
Of course.
Those are,
We're still prior to 8 o'clock.
Always.
Yeah, paper copies of minutes are
Yeah.
permanent records. Those can
Yeah.
never go away. Unless, I mean, I've seen town halls burned down and everything. But
The record of the meeting is simply now just a public record of the proceedings shall be taken in writing and incorporated in the board's minutes associated with RSA 91A. So we actually eliminated entirely the requirement for maintenance of physical recordings because
Okay.
there are really no physical recordings anymore. They're
so the
electronic.
recordings are gratuitous and people can make use of them as long as they exist, but they're not official records.
Correct.
Okay. Fine with me, I suppose. Okay. Let's have that magic motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second. Paul? The last meeting. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? 700. We're adjourned. Thank you all very much. Don't forget to turn your microphones off. And
You guys both sign the plan?